Do you ever fear that you won't come back from either a mania or a depression?
I don't. That said, I do. I used to play more with fire, as you might say, in terms of indulging hypomania. And now, having had that third episode, I am not going to go down that road again. So as soon as I feel it coming on, I just take the medicine, disengage, and yeah, that's it.
Hello, and welcome to At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a multimedia platform that brings together people from a diverse background of lives, careers, and experiences who all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of finding and raising their voices to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium holds a space for everyone to share their stories, to be heard, and to bring us inspiration. Today, I'm thrilled to share the podium with Zak Sandler. Zak Sandler is a writer, composer, and lyricist, specializing in musical theater and screenplays. At age 26, he began playing piano on Broadway for Wicked and went on to play for Mean Girls, Motown, and The Color Purple. His autobiographical solo musical about his experience with bipolar, called Inside My Head, was developed at the Kennedy Center and has been performed in part on the Kennedy Center's Millennium Stage. It includes a discussion and can be performed at schools, organizations, and companies where it fits in with both mental wellness and DE&I programming. He is also starting a business called Musical Team Building, in which he helps employees write musical comedy sketches about their own departments. Zak has appeared on 6 podcasts, and this is lucky number 7, reaching more than 12 million listeners, and he will be giving a TED Talk in February. He doesn't use the phrases mental illness or bipolar disorder because he feels it implies there's something wrong with him that needs fixing. Instead, he uses the phrase mental condition and simply bipolar. Zak is a proud graduate of Yale University with a BA in music. Zak, welcome to At the Podium.
Thanks so much for having me, Patrick.
I'm so glad that we're sitting down today to talk.
Yeah, I'm so happy we're doing it.
I wanted to talk to you because I think your story is going to be very helpful for people because right now the entire world, I feel like, either is suffering from mental conditions or they know someone who is, especially over the last 2.5 years when people have been isolated. We faced massive social upheaval. We faced a pandemic. And I think people's mental health is top of mind right now for many people.
Yeah, I'm glad you said condition rather than illness or disorder. For myself, I feel like illness and disorder can be more stigmatizing negative words, like there's something wrong with me that needs to be fixed. Whereas condition is more like that's just a part of who I am. So
Right,
for
right.
using that term.
And I think, and it's interesting because I think people are trying to really understand what causes it, what it is, how do we manage it, how do we make space for people in our society whose minds may work differently than what we perceive to be the normal functioning of someone's brain.
Absolutely.
So I want to get into your story, and in your journey, you talk about your journey really beginning with a late night call that you had with your parents when you were studying at Yale. And the call that you had with them, it so concerned them that they got in their car and they drove to New Haven, Connecticut to check on you to make sure that you were okay. And they ended up taking you to a hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. And then you ended up voluntarily committing yourself into that hospital. Was that when your life changed?
Definitely one of the major turning points for me. I had already spent 2.5 nights staying up till about 6 a.m. every night. And I wrote 39 pages in those 3 nights, a manifesto called My Religion, where I talked about philosophy and psychology and society and had these great ideas, and they were also very disorganized.
Mhm.
And so I called my parents, yeah, in the middle of the night, as you said. I had an apple in my hand, and I was describing to them how profound the shape of this apple is. It's the circle of life, and it's the Adam and Eve story. And my dad is a psychiatrist, my mom's a social worker, and my brother was with them too, and he's an anesthesiologist. And so they were concerned, as you mentioned. They drove up through the night. They took me to, actually, it was the Department of Undergraduate Health, and it was there that a psychiatrist recommended I go to the hospital.
Mm.
And I was totally shocked because I thought that I was doing great. I felt ecstatic and happy. I was so creative. I was reducing the universe to a single point, the triumvirate being self, other, and God, and then realizing that self and other are the same, because to me, I'm a self, to you, I'm an other, to you, you're a self, to me, I'm an other. So those go together. And then man just being a projection of God as himself or herself or itself. So it reduces to one. And I just finished that proof when I got called into the doctor. So I was totally shocked. And I said, okay, well, give me a few hours. I'll take a walk with my family and I'll calm down and I'll show you I'm fine. And the doctor would not let me do that.
Mhm.
He took my parents into another room because my mom was very against me going to the hospital, and he wanted to discuss the options with them. I was left in the room with my brother, and I remember completely breaking down. I started weeping and telling him I didn't want to go to the hospital. I mean, I really didn't want to go. I did technically voluntarily admit myself because, as I later found out from personal experience, involuntary hospitalization is much worse.
Mm.
So I was able to go pretty smoothly to Yale New Haven, and the next morning there, I got my diagnosis of bipolar, and I think that was a turning point in terms of realizing that is an experience that I went through. I didn't think I would write about it at that point. I didn't think it was necessarily even a part of who I was. So I was still figuring it out at that point.
So when you were up writing that manifesto for 3 days, did you have an awareness that that was not quote unquote normal, that it was somehow indicating something was different happening within you? Or did it feel like it was the right thing to do at the right time?
Both. I think
Mhm.
it was something I'd never done. I mean, I'd stayed up, I'd pulled one all-nighter before,
Mhm.
more like studying for an exam. So this
Right.
felt much more fun and natural. And it also did feel different. It it didn't feel bad, but it felt exciting and new.
So when the doctor comes back and they say that you have something going on, were they able to say right away that it was bipolar, or were they still trying to understand what was happening for you when you were in the hospital at Yale New Haven?
They pretty much went straight into bipolar. And it's interesting because even today, I'm still figuring it out, because bipolar is traditionally more of a mood condition. So it's alternating rapidly from depression to mania and back, and behavioral conditions like impulsivity, impulsive spending, sex, all sorts of drug use. And I really never had any of that. For me, it was these bigger thoughts and racing thoughts and writing, not being able to stop. So that's more of the what we call psychosis part of it. And schizophrenia is more towards that, with what you might call delusions and hallucinations. And we could talk more about that, about whether that's real or not. But so now I'm like, am I bipolar? Am I schizoaffective, which is more a combination of bipolar and schizophrenic? But at the time, it was a bipolar diagnosis, and I had no idea what that meant, or that it ran in my family, or anything. I just knew it was something that was, I didn't want to be that, and it might negatively impact how people saw me, friends, family, teachers,
Mm.
employers.
What was that journey for you to accept the diagnosis? I mean, Was it an immediate thing, or did you have to take time to work through it, understand it? Were you even open to the idea that that was something that was happening to you?
It took me 9 years to accept it as a part of who I am. In that 9-year period, I went without any major episodes. So I was able to put it at the back of my mind. And then in 2015, I had a second manic episode that sent me to the hospital. And that was another turning point. Was the night I got to the hospital, I immediately accepted it. I went in without any resistance. I said, I'm hungry, give me some food, and I'll be here for a few days. That's fine. Because the first time I thought, oh, I'll get out the next day. No, it was 5 days. And this time, okay, I'll be here 5 days or a week, and that's okay.
So in that 9-year period, were you having minor episodes? Were you even, what was happening during those 9 years before you went back?
I had a few minor blips. I remember one was after I moved to New York, and so maybe 3 to 5 years in. And I remember going for a run and thinking that I was Jesus, which is a common theme for me. And I know a lot of people who have psychotic episodes. So I felt that the racing thoughts coming back, those bigger feelings of, some people would say, grandiosity and depression. I had definitely some dips here and there. I've been very lucky that my depression does not tend to last very long, usually a matter of hours or a day. It really sucks when it happens, but it doesn't disable me for too long.
And you say that when you were going on this run that your mind was racing and that you were ideating that you were Jesus or believed that you were Jesus. Is that you telling yourself that, or did you hear someone else telling you that you are Jesus Christ?
Such a great question. The one time I heard another voice, the only time I actually have heard an audible voice in my head, was the day before my second hospitalization. And I was standing in our living room on Roosevelt Island, and I heard this voice say, Zach, do you know who you are? And I said, no. And the voice said, you are the middle teller. And I thought to myself, middle teller? What does that mean? That sounds profound. What does it mean? And then I figured out that there were 3 tellers. First teller is Jesus, second teller is me, and then there will be a third teller in the future. And the role of the tellers is to bring ancient wisdom to light, to help humanity realize their potential, heal, and this idea of being a very special person, which is definitely related to these thoughts about being Jesus. And it's evolved. I would say that since those first thoughts came on in my first episode, they have persisted even when I'm not in a manic episode. And at the same time, I now believe that we all live in our own parallel realities, and in those realities, we are each the Messiah. So I am the Messiah, and in your plane of reality, you are the Messiah, and so on.
Are you meaning that literally, or are you meaning that metaphorically, that within the universe of my life, my world, my mind, I am the center of that universe, I am the light of that universe? Or do you believe that within each of us there is a form of the deity?
It's like each person's reality is the whole universe. It's just our own journey through it. And so there's whatever 8 billion messiahs and 8 billion parallel realities that are all the whole universe.
Why Jesus, though, and not Buddha or Gandhi or, I don't know, Isaac Newton? Why do it goes to Jesus?
Possibly because I was raised in a Judeo-Christian context. I'm Jewish and went to Hebrew school, had a bar mitzvah. And so even though I'm not Christian, Jesus was the figure that appeared the most in terms of that history. I'm really curious if people in other societies, if it is like you said, Muhammad or Buddha, etc.
You said earlier that it was genetic. So when you were being diagnosed and your family, I'm sure, was going through their own coming to terms with the situation that you were in, is it on both sides of your family? Was it something that they were familiar with, so it wasn't a surprise to them, or was this news for them also?
My dad is, I would say, bipolar 2. So he had one major manic episode in med school and has had depression for a lot of his life. One of my great aunts is bipolar. My aunt is bipolar. So it definitely runs in the family. That said, I didn't know any of that until after my first episode. And I really wish I had, because I think I could have recognized it and stopped it from going so far.
Was it a secret, or was it just no one knew, or no one talked about it? So was it they didn't tell you, therefore you weren't prepared for what could happen, or did they not just did not know?
I hadn't showed any signs or symptoms of that up until I was 20. And what my dad told me is that I think it was partly he didn't want to make me worry. And more than that, it was this feeling of shame of what happened and not wanting to unnecessarily share information that's not relevant, because I hadn't had any problems. And looking back, he said that's one of the biggest regrets of his life, and that he wished he had told me on my way to college.
Does it usually manifest in people around the late teens, early 20s, when they have some sort of condition that they have to address?
Absolutely.
And is it chemical because of puberty and the development, or is it usually triggered by an incident?
It is, I would say, environmental in a lot of people, which was true for me.
What do you mean by that, environmental?
Like an external activator. I won't say trigger, because I find that word to be violent, though commonly used. But for me, it was, I had wanted to be the pitch pipe of my a cappella group for a while. That's the Spizwinks. And at the same time, musical theater is my biggest passion. And I knew that if I was music director of the group, I couldn't do any theater, so it's very intense. And I chose to be music director. And I regretted that choice pretty quickly and ended up auditioning for the main stage musical. I got offered a role. I had to turn it down. And there was one night when the Spizwinks and I were rehearsing, and the cast of the musical came in. That was their turn to use the room. We left, and I stayed behind, and I stayed there while the rest of the group left, and I put my ear on the door and started to cry, because I realized that I really wished I had been on the other side of that door. And that immediately sent me into a depression, where I felt a feeling I'd never had before, which was this heaviness in my chest. And it's this feeling of sadness or crying behind my eyes. When I'm sad, it's more here, but when I'm depressed, it's somehow more here. And like, I can't move as much. I have no motivation. And even though I had a girlfriend, and I had friends and classes, I felt really alone. And then actually, I think for some people, including me, that depression can be the activator for mania. It's basically my brain's way of saying, this depression sucks, try something else. It's like, okay, let's try mania. It sounds a lot better.
But let me ask you, so I'm sure before you were 20, you had moments when you were sad or depressed. What was it about this depression that was different?
I don't know if I'd been depressed. If I had, I didn't acknowledge or see it that way. But whatever we call it, definitely was a different feeling. With sadness, it had been about specific things. Like, oh, I'm sad we didn't win this baseball game, or I'm sad I didn't get an A+ on this exam. But with this, it was more general. It was a feeling, my whole body, my whole spirit, my whole soul. And even though it was activated by that one thing, it became pervasive.
And when you're in an episode now, when you're activated either in depression or mania, are you cognizant that that's what's happening and that you're able to say, oh, this is what this is? or does it catch you unawares?
At this point, I'm very aware. The depression, I'm often able to handle it by taking really small steps. Sitting up in bed is the first step. Once I accomplish that, I feel great. Then I move on to the next step. Standing up, once I accomplish that, and so on. And also sometimes listening to music, listening to comedy will help. Telling people that I feel depressed can help a lot. And in terms of mania or hypomania, which is a less severe version, I will know the most recent, or one of the most recent, was I think I was going for a run again, and
You in the
ran
running, you in the running, Zach. Maybe you should rollerblade or hike. I don't know.
You're right. Yeah, yeah. So I ran around the neighborhood and I saw 3 different Saturn cars parked on the side of the road. And as you know, Saturn is not made anymore. They're very rare these days. And I saw 3 of them. And then I remembered that I had written a piece of music a few months earlier called Saturn. And I started having all these thoughts about different levels of the game of life, that, like cats, I have 9 existences and I have to win the game before we get to number 9, or the universe ends, we lose the game. And 7's my lucky number, so I was thinking, oh, maybe this is the 7th one. It's Jupiter, Saturn, the 7th planet. Turns out it's the 6th, but in any case, I was having all these thoughts about planetary gaming, you could call it.
Mhm.
And that's when I felt the thoughts racing. It's like a sense of, you picture a mountain and hiking up it in a circle. So the further I get up the mountain, the thinner it gets and the faster it goes up. I felt that. And so I said, okay, I wanted to bike ride. I said, this is not a good time to bike ride. I'm going to go home. I'm going to take my Zyprexa, which is what I take for that, and knocked it out.
How long did it take for the doctors to get your medication right? Or does that have to be recalibrated as you grow or as
That's
the
a great,
condition shifts or morphs?
yeah, that's a great question. So it's been 16 years since my first episode, and I have been on 14 different medications.
Wow.
At first, it took a while. I started actually with Zyprexa on a pretty high dose, and that really flattened my emotional life. It really flattened my creativity. I absolutely hated it. And so eventually, after 6 months, we switched to, actually can't remember at that point, but I was on that. I was on lithium, a mood stabilizer, which I just stopped a few years ago. I was then put later on actually it's called an anticonvulsant called Lamictal, which is great for bipolar depression, because typical SSRIs or antidepressants can actually activate mania in bipolar people. So Lamictal is great because it doesn't do that. And that is a drug that I think is really good for me. And then it's just been trial and error. And I think as my body has changed, it does change. The dosages also are very important. I was on a antipsychotic called Risperidone right after my second episode, which worked great. I loved it. It had basically no side effects. I had all my creativity. The only problem was that it was raising my prolactin levels. It causes, like, if I had it for too long, I would develop breasts or start lactating. And yeah, there might be other consequences from it. So basically the doctor said I should stop it. And nowadays I'm on Seroquel as an antipsychotic, Lamictal, and I switched from the lithium to a mood stabilizer called Valproate, which is a more modern treatment, and so far seems to be working pretty well.
You just said something very interesting, and you've said it a couple of times in the conversation, that when you are in this state of mania, that there is a creative force that you feel when you're in that space, and you are a creative person, you're a gifted musician. Is that part of your brain, part of what makes your gift activate?
I think it's related. Having, I guess I'll call it a bipolar brain, I do think is directly connected to my creativity. I'm giving a TED talk in February about this called "Could Mental Disorder Be a Superpower?" And one thing I discovered is something called conceptual over-inclusiveness, which happens during hypomania and mania. And it's basically where I see connection between lots of ideas and thoughts that others might not see. And that is a big boon to creativity. That said, when I've actually been in the middle of a manic episode, I've tried to write music and it's pretty terrible. But I will say that it also happens the other direction. There was a time I was working on Inside My Head, which is my musical about my bipolar, and I was trying to come up with music that would evoke mania. And so I was sitting at my keyboard fooling around, and I finally found something I really liked. So I played it over and over to refine it. And as I did that, I started to feel manic. So then I had to stop and reset. And I mean, of course, that's when I knew that was the right music for it.
Right. You're like, I got it.
Exactly.
You said earlier that your dad had a regret about not letting you know what was in your sort of DNA, your biological history, and you are in a situation now where you're about to get married. And I wonder if you have, well, I have two questions about that. I wonder if you have that concern about passing that on to your own children. And then I wonder, how does a person who is in relationship, a close relationship with a person who is who has this condition or many other conditions, how do they support you through that?
I'll answer second one first.
Okay.
So, Lena, who's my fiance, we've known each other since high school, and so she's known about this bipolar well before we got engaged. And in fact, during my third episode, which is 2019, right before we got together again, she was very much involved. That was here in DC, and she was visiting me in the hospital with my parents. She was communicating with, I had another girlfriend in New York at the time, so she was communicating with her, and she was amazing at being the person in a way in charge of communication and taking care of me in a certain way. And in terms of day to day, I will tell her if I feel off, if I feel depressed or manic, and sometimes she'll even pick it up before I do.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She'll say, are you like, she's not afraid to tell me or advise me. In terms of your first question, I haven't thought about it a lot, but I think if I knew genetically, and we did actually do some genetic testing, I probably would not filter it out, because I think that it's a superpower in a lot of ways. I know there's a danger to it because I'm very high functioning, and a lot of people have more struggles with bipolar than I do. But that said, I do think it's so much a part of who I am that cutting it off would feel wrong.
It's an interesting question, because I think as science develops and we can start saying, oh, you are prone for this, or you have a predilection for that in your DNA and your genes, it begs the question of, well, what do we do with that now? This is where the ethicists need to start coming in, because I think as we start to learn and understand more about what could go wrong, or what time bombs are in all of us that we may not have known 40 years ago, what does that mean about how do we live our lives today? And what does that mean about procreation for the future?
Yeah, that's a very interesting and important topic.
What don't people understand about having bipolar or having a mental condition?
One thing is that it's often the episodes are often situations that I can't control, or that I don't want to be happening, and perhaps I want help. And so if there's someone on the outside, it might be hard to understand that. And another thing is that when I'm manic and I have big ideas, it's really very helpful if people will meet me where I'm at and they will ask me about these ideas. They'll show interest, they'll engage with me. Because in situations where the opposite has been true, it's made me angry, it's made me irritable, and it made things worse. So,
Do you ever fear that you won't come back from either a mania or a depression?
I don't. That said, I do. I used to play more with fire, as you might say, in terms of indulging hypomania. And now, having had that third episode, I am not going to go down that road again. So as soon as I feel it coming on, I just take the medicine, disengage, and yeah, that's it.
So in all of this, you are a musically gifted person. You have this gift for music. And I wonder, separate and apart from our previous conversation, when did you know that you had this gift, this talent for music and for the piano?
Pretty young. I took a group piano class when I was 5, and they said that I was so advanced that I should study privately at age 6. And I began with one of my biggest mentors, not just musically, but spiritually, Irina Orloff, my piano teacher from age 6 to 18.
Mhm.
And she really gave me, I would say, everything in terms of musicality that I learned, expression, and my writing comes from that. And she even got me over the hump. When I was 12, I really wanted to quit because, well, put it this way, I didn't want to practice. I really hated practicing.
You have to do that with any gift. You got to practice. Otherwise, it's a hobby.
Right. Yeah. In fact, there's a great cartoon at a music school I teach at. It's like, I wonder how you're so good at drawing. Practice. Some people are just so gifted naturally. It's practice.
It's
I'll
practice.
never understand why. Practice.
Right.
Okay. But she was great. She said, okay, that's fine. You don't have to practice. We'll do every other lesson. We'll sight read forehand version of a symphony or concerto. And then the other lessons will work on your pieces without practice. That's fine. And not only did it get me through, it also made me into a great sight reader, which I'm very
I was
grateful
about to say, that's the real gift, right?
for. Yeah. No, I'm very, very grateful for that.
So in your career, you have been in the pit for Wicked, which we know is a phenomenon. And when I saw that you had played for The Color Purple, I remember going to see The Color Purple when it reopened on Broadway with Cynthia Erivo. And I walked in with my sort of like preconceptions of what the musical was going to be. You were probably playing the night I was in the audience. And I remember the last big song that she sings, and I'm Here, I think is the name of the song. Is that the name of the song?
Yeah.
And the way she just took the audience in the palm of her hand and just said, I'm going to just make you be right here with me. She couldn't have done that unless she had spent the last 2 hours making us fall in love with her, right? You don't get that
Right.
without the build. You don't get the payoff. What is it like when you're in the pit and you're that close to greatness happening? How does that impact you as the artist? Because you have feelings, emotions, reactions, and yet you still have to play. You can't stop and break down with the audience. So how do you balance all of that? And what is it like to be that close to something that you know is that powerful?
When I played that song and we got to the end, pretty much invariably I would cry. Luckily, I was key too, so my part was pretty easy. But so it is that, and similar with Wicked, I played key 1 for that, and I had this big monitor of the stage in front of me, and in the middle of Defying Gravity, when she flies up on the broom, I would often start crying then as well. And then I had to play a lot more. But I just channel that into the playing. And in terms of dialogue, you mentioned dialogue with the actors, dialogue with the audience. It's really a matter of being present and hearing is the audience laughing at this stuff today? Not as much. Does it feel like there's a lull or there's not? And the wonderful thing to me about shows that run for a long time is you might think they get boring, and in a way they do. In another way, there's always different because the audience is different every night.
You've gone through so much in your life. I wonder what part of your life, what step, what journey has been your biggest leap of faith?
Oh, leap of faith. The mental health journey seems to have been pretty gradual in some ways, and it's also felt easy in a lot of ways. The episodes were not easy, but the journey to writing about it and how my musical has developed, that has felt quite natural. One big thing that changed is I was married before this. It was a 5-year relationship and we were monogamous, and I'd always known that something was different about me, that I was able to love multiple people at the same time and have that interest in that. And there was a moment when it really hit me that that wasn't going to work for me. I was driving through the Southwest with my wife, and I had this vision of, at the time I had a crush at work, and I had this vision of the three of us being together and getting along and having a life that not necessarily all three equal. I didn't want to be married to the other person, but to have that 3 people and being able to see that. And then a few months later, I remember being on the phone with my best friend walking home from Wicked, and it was like so clear, this is it. And that night I told her, and within a week or 2 we were separated. And so my life changed very quickly, for the better. And that was a big leap of faith because it was something I'd wanted for a long time, but hadn't tried. And obviously divorce is a big thing, and it did upend my life quite a bit.
So, Zak, in this season of the show, we're talking to people who have found their voice or who are in the process of finding their voice. And I wonder, if you have found your voice, what you want to say with that.
I think finding my voice is an ongoing process and always will be, because I'm changing every day, growing, learning. And at the same time, I do think I've found my voice for today, at least, which is how do you describe it? I think a lot of it is taking ownership of my story and feeling comfortable and safe to share that and write about it and to express it in all sorts of ways, whether it's journaling or writing a show or a TED Talk or talking to people at a party. Being able to be authentic and open and lead with what I call my intuition. My Blake is what I call him. He's the part of me that knows what I need to do to be happy, and to not lead with my inner jerk, who I call Charlie. Charlie is trying to throw me off in every possible way.
I'm sure every Charlie is now like, I'm not a jerk.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the mania and depression and many other mental conditions are Charlie's method of throwing us off. And I fell for it. I mean, the mania is so tempting that it felt like Blake, but it ain't Blake. And I want to mention that there's this book I'm reading, amazing. It's called Finding Your Own North Star. And she talks about the essential self, which is basically the Blake, and the social self, which is this part we develop as to what's appropriate in the adult world.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me the other day. I think that depression is actually an overactivation of the social self, which is so inhibitory. It's like, can't do this, can't do that, can't do the other, I'm stuck. Stuckness is a feeling of depression. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of things, that an overactive essential self is mania. It's this only this creative and exuberant and unstoppable feeling. And so it hit me also, this term, to circle back to the beginning, that psychosis, which is often written off as unrealistic or fake or even, what's the word, pathological. But what if psychosis is actually just unbridled imagination?
Can you explain more, take us deeper into Blake and Charlie and why you created these characters, almost these other people, other entities, to personify these different parts of your condition?
I've been doing a lot of work with creating characters inside of my head that I can talk to. For example, emotions, like my anger is a character, my worry is a character, my self-critic is a character, and I'm able to work with them as people in order to improve my life, in order to balance what's going on inside. It's so important to recognize what feels right and what feels wrong. And it's become really physical to me, actually. When Blake is active, I have this sensation rising in my chest, a warmth, an opening. And on the other hand, if it's Charlie, or rather, if it's the opposite of what Blake is telling me, it's the opposite. It's this tightening, this closing off, this burning in a negative way. And I will, as characters, I will ask yes or no questions. Usually I'll talk to Blake because he's the head coach, as I call him.
He's the nicer one too, right?
That Charlie is basically Metallica, this rock concert,
No.
whereas Blake is this little piccolo far in the distance, and it's hard to pick out, but it's there. So I'll ask yes or no questions, such as I'll wake up, feel kind of tired, but also supposed to get up. So I'll say, should I get up? And then if it's a yes, I'll feel that opening up feeling. And if it's a no, I'll feel the opposite. And it's that easy. Sometimes, if it's not as clear, I will reverse the question and say, is it not time to get up? And it's actually interesting because the negative reaction to the not is often much clearer than the positive reaction to the yes.
But do you get up though?
It's hard. I mean, one of Charlie's tricks is say, oh, you need to sleep more, stay in bed. So today I did a decent job. It was later than I wanted to, but not as late as it could have been. I said, oh, I got to be on the phone with Patrick soon.
Well,
yeah,
I'm glad Blake won today.
I had this amazing revelation. I think it may have been while I was running as well. that Blake actually created Charlie, because when it was just Blake,
wow, okay,
it was too easy. It was always Blake. There was no choice. This idea of these characters inside my head, I expand a lot. I expand it to emotions. So my anger is a guy with a sombrero and two guns like this, and when my anger is activated, he starts shooting, and sometimes when it's rage, it'll turn into this fiery dragon. And another example, my anxiety or my worry is a guy called Walter Worry. And when I feel worried, I'm able to hold his hand and say, hey, I'm here for you, it's okay. And then one other example is with a self-critic. So of course we all have our self-critic, and I have discovered it's based somewhat on, there's a psychological model called internal family systems, which is the same idea that we have all these parts inside that are people essentially, and that some of them actually don't really want to be there in the form that they're in. And I believe the self-critic is one of those. So I had a conversation with my self-critic. He was facing away from me, and I said, hey, how old do you think I am? And he said, 6. I said, oh, you think I'm 6? Okay. Well, turn around, look at me. They did. I'm 36. I don't need you to tell me what I need to do. Like maybe in the past I did, maybe when I was really little, I needed to do certain things to please my parents, so I would have their attention and their love. But I don't need that anymore. And so he said, oh, you don't need that anymore? Wow, awesome. I said, okay, cool. So what do you want to be if you're not the self-critic? And he said, I want to be the tutor. So I'll give you advice, but in a gentle and a positive way. I said, oh, that sounds great. So now we have these conversations, and I will admit it's hard sometimes. It does slip back sometimes. So these conversations are really helpful in terms of understanding and getting in touch with what's happening inside. And it's a big shortcut for me instead of having to carry around a feeling all day. Originally it took me about 15 minutes to see the character, to have the conversation. Now I can do it in 10 seconds.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And one of the techniques now is I imagine it like a lighthouse. You have the light spinning around, and the light is what sees the emotion of the character. And so even within 2 seconds, it can be seen. And my therapist suggested, well, what if that light is a warm, compassionate, loving light? And that really does help with some of the emotions too.
You're really making me think differently about all of this in terms of where is that line of normal and where is that line of brilliance?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then where is the condition? And I wonder if those lines blur.
Definitely. I think it's actually all mental conditions are on a spectrum in my mind. And the one thing I really draw attention to in my TED Talk is that even though people with bipolar, ADHD, autism, even though we all have special powers in some way, that everyone has special powers in some way, because we're all on a spectrum of these different things. Even if the part of the spectrum we're on is right in the middle, basically 0.
Right.
I think we're all on some spectrum that's a little bit off from center.
And you have to wonder if in 100 years they'll look very differently at these various conditions and what is normal. And I think your dad, in a way, and the idea of shame has probably hampered a lot of understanding that people have. The shame that people have around things like this has probably hampered the understanding of it and the acceptance of it, and finding a way to integrate it into. Some people just have different minds that work differently.
I definitely felt a lot of shame that first 9 years, and that it's a shame of losing control of my mind and a fear of losing control again. And really being able to accept it is a way to move forward from that shame, and not just accepting it, but then also taking the step to share it. And I've been very lucky that I don't remember a single time that I've told somebody about being bipolar and I've gotten a negative reaction.
Wow.
Yeah.
Zak, thank you so much for your time today. I so appreciate you telling your story. I think a lot of people will empathize with where you are and learn from where you are. So thank you for making time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. This is a lot of fun. You ask great questions, and you're an excellent host.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, after your TED Talk, you'll have to come back and we'll learn some more from you. All right. To those of you who are watching or listening, remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Zak.
Thanks, Ben.